Ever since it came out in 1986, there's been a furious debate raging among fans of the musical Little Shop of Horrors over whether or not the filmmakers were right to change the ending of the story or not. But that being said, what one must also keep in mind is that neither director Frank Oz nor screenwriter Howard Ashman actually wanted to change the ending and only did so after realizing they couldn't release the original version with the abysmal ratings test audiences gave it. But the point is, there are those who believe the original, sad ending where Audrey 2 kills Audrey and Seymour and takes over the world is the more appropriate ending since it is the one from the play, while others believe that Seymour triumphing over Audrey 2 and getting his happy ending, all the while leaving a hint that things might not be as right as they seem, is the better one. And personally, I believe, even when looking at it from an objective standpoint, that the 1986 theatrical version, or the happy ending, is indeed the right one for the movie. And today, while being as fair and impartial as possible, I would like to explain why that is. And in case you don't want anything else ruined, there will be spoilers ahead for both the movie and play. Okay, so the most often cited reason that the original ending of Little Shop of Horrors is the superior one is because it's the same ending the play has. Audrey 2 wins and proceeds to take over the world. However, the thing is that despite the movie being a fairly accurate retelling of the original play, the two have some very crucial differences to them, and they end up making the ending of the play feel out of place in the movie version, which is why test audiences universally rejected it. Because, to put it simply, both versions start out telling the same kind of story, but then veer off in opposite directions. As I touched on in my video, How to Properly Sell a Soul and Get It Back, which you can find a link in the description to, there are generally two types of ways stories like Little Shop of Horrors are told and play out. Which is that a person makes a deal with the devil or a devil stand-in, and either the person jumps off the slippery slope and dies as a result of their actions, or the person is able to see the error of their ways before it's too late and find a way out of the deal. And ironically, the play tells the story done the first way rather effectively, while the movie accidentally sets it up to play out the second way. So having it ultimately end the first way feels completely off. Because here's the thing. In the play, Seymour willingly decides to kill people to get what the plant is offering him. There's even a whole song during Orion's death scene where Seymour specifically decides not to interfere and let the gas kill him in a vain attempt to technically keep his hands clean. And not to mention, he resorts to feeding innocent people to the plant in order to continue getting what he wants. In other words, in the play, there's no question that Seymour is deserving of his eventual fate because he makes the active choice to indulge in murder for his own personal gain. In the movie, however, it's not presented that way at all, because for one thing, only 2 people end up dying and being fed to the plant, and neither of them are the direct result of Seymour's actions. And on the whole, he's portrayed as having much less agency in his actions, coming across as a man who's so nice and timid that he can't even stand up for himself. Basically, the movie does way too good a job of earning Seymour the audience's sympathy, to the point that it's impossible not to want to see him succeed, even with him being complacent in the murders. In fact, Howard Ashman initially refused to change the ending, specifically because he argued that Seymour would be on morally shaky ground with the audience if he were to get off scot-free. But in the movie that's presented, that simply isn't true. And let me give you a couple of examples as to why that is. Now, as I mentioned earlier, during Orion's death scene in the play, Seymour is explicitly shown making the decision not to save Orion's life and let him die. But in the movie, not only is the song cut out, but the context is completely different. Because Seymour instead comes across as so terrified he can't even move of his own free will, as if he's petrified with fear. And considering the fact that Orion had just been menacing him with dentist tools, it's very easy to argue that he simply is too scared to do anything and isn't making a conscious decision not to save him. But it's their final exchange that really helps keep Seymour sympathetic to the viewer. "What did I ever do to you?" "Nothing. It's what you did to her." Now, why does that make such a difference, you might ask? Because audiences tend to be very sympathetic towards movie characters that get revenge on somebody else's behalf that deserves it. Think about it. Audrey deserves none of the abuse Orion throws at her, but won't stand up for herself. So the fact that Seymour says he's punishing Orion for everything he did to her, rather than because his death can personally benefit him, firmly keeps him a sympathetic character, especially because the audience knows Orion completely deserves it. Or take Mushnik's death for another example. And this one is particularly severe in how different it is. Because in the play, Mushnik adopts Seymour and treats him like his own son. And after realizing Seymour knows more about Orion's death than he let on, tells him to go to the police and make a statement to clear himself. And Seymour chooses to tell him that he's hiding non-existent money inside the plant, betraying his father figure and leading to his death. In the movie, however, Mushnik spends the whole movie being a complete jerk to Seymour and treating him like a slave. Then he gets Seymour to confess at gunpoint that he was involved in Orion's death, at which point he tries to blackmail Seymour into letting him have the plant for himself. And note that he just tells him he'll give Seymour a ticket out of town if he complies. He could very well be planning to shoot him anyway after getting him to reveal his secrets. But if that doesn't make Seymour sympathetic enough, it's Mushnik who leans into the plan of his own free will, and Seymour appears to be trying to warn him before Audrey too shuts its mouth on him. To put it simply, if there had been a security camera recording all of that, not a single court in the world would have found Seymour guilty of murder, especially because he tries to warn him before he's eaten. The most Seymour would be charged with was negligence, and even then, because Mushnik willingly leans inside the plant, it would be very difficult to even argue that. My point is, because Mushnik's death pretty much comes from his own stupidity, along with the fact that he's presented as an unsympathetic jerk trying to blackmail Seymour, as well as Seymour's trying to warn him before it happens, makes it impossible to blame Seymour for his death. At this point, he still comes across as extremely worthy of sympathy and only loosely responsible for the deaths of two unsympathetic jerks at best. And on top of that, he's never once shown actually enjoying the success that his victims give him. There's even a whole montage of everybody offering him everything he ever wanted on a silver platter, but he's shown to feel way too guilty to actually take pleasure in it. Unlike in the play, where he is shown to take enjoyment in what the plant gives him. To put it simply, in the movie, Seymour is only somewhat complacent in the murders of two people that the audience has no reason to miss. And even then, he's shown to feel so guilty over it that he doesn't enjoy anything the plant gives him. How could anybody possibly say he deserves to die for his actions when he's put into that context? He's only ever shown to be meek, nervous, and remorseful, never once showing anything resembling malicious intent. The only time he even comes close to actually reaping the benefits of what he's done is when he starts dating Audrey as a result of Orion's death. But even then, considering the circumstances, it's impossible to blame him for that. Both because his happiness doesn't last long before the guilt gets to him, and because he only ended up dating Audrey because he was being nice and comforting her, not because he saw his opening and decided to take it. In other words, everything in this movie sets up Seymour to almost give in to temptation, but finally grow a backbone and stand up for himself and what's right, killing Audrey too in an act of redemption. So in the original cut, when that doesn't happen, it comes across as way too depressing and undeserved for what had been set up beforehand. And not to mention, his death scene comes across as pretty sadistic. He's completely humiliated and has way too much time to process what's coming before it does. Even in the play, where he's infinitely more guilty and less sympathetic, he gets to die with dignity and try to redeem himself. Heck, there have even been absolutely horrible, unsympathetic villains to die quicker and less humiliated than he does. So the point is, many would already feel that Seymour doesn't deserve to die, period. But the fact that he also dies with zero dignity in a drawn-out sequence only makes it feel even worse. Now, depending on how much one knows about the original play, will also affect how one feels about the different endings. But looking at it from the perspective of somebody who knows nothing about the play, which is what most of the audience, especially in 1986, would have been, Seymour's redemption through killing Audrey too basically looks like a foregone conclusion, which is honestly why it feels so appropriate even though it had to be hastily rewritten, because it just feels like the ending it was meant to have based off everything that had been set up earlier. Now, Frank Oz also had his own theory as to why test audiences couldn't accept the sad ending, which was that on stage, the actors come out at the end and take a bow, which subconsciously takes away from the sadness of the characters' deaths because you can see they're alright, which is something a movie can't do. But even if you want to disregard everything I just said about Seymour being too sympathetic, there's still more to it than that. Because simply put, when you're watching a stage play, you know what you're seeing isn't real. There might be an illusion of reality, but it never becomes so believable that audience members might be tempted to run up on stage and help the characters out. From the word go, a part of them knows it's just actors reciting lines. But a movie is so much more immersive, almost as if you're a fly on the wall watching actual, real events playing out in front of you. And now that I think about it, That's actually a good way to describe most movies. The audience is just an anonymous spectator witnessing stuff that feels real and really real happening before them, but are unable to interfere in any way. To go back to that example from before, nobody is going to try to run up on stage during a murder because they're never going to believe that strongly that it's real. In a movie, however, people often feel a compulsion to help the characters but are physically unable to, because movies can be so immersive that it makes them feel like what they're seeing is actually real. To put it simply, Seymour's death in the play feels like an actor jumping into a prop. Seymour's death in the movie feels like an undeserved man about to meet a horrible fate. One already has an element of artificiality to it, and the other doesn't, which also makes it more likely that the audience will get really attached to the characters as a result. And because Seymour was already made more sympathetic than in the play. But getting back on topic, why Frank Oz decided to make all these changes to Seymour's character, I have no idea. Maybe they wanted to add an element of moral ambiguity to his death and took it too far? Or maybe they were just doing the standard Hollywood practice of toning down the characters to be more likable. Because as I argued in my video on gray morality, which you can also find a link in the description to, Hollywood was very well known for doing that. But whatever the reason they did it, the point still remains that for the story they ended up telling, the theatrical ending is the more appropriate conclusion to that story. Okay, I think I've made my point quite clear. So now I'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you believe that the happy ending to Little Shop of Horrors was the right one based off the fact that Seymour was made too sympathetic to die? Or do you still believe that the original ending is better, even with the changes that were made? Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, you do not have to agree with anything I said in this video if you want to. You can believe the original ending was perfect and that everything I said was completely wrong if you'd like. And thank you all for watching. It's all greatly appreciated. And I hope to see you all next time.